What happened?
Someone set up us the bug. We get signal.
What?
Main screen turn on.
It's you.
How are you, gentlemen? All your base are belong to us. You are on the way to destruction.
What you say?
You have no chance to survive, mate, your time. Ha ha ha. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base,
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the debut episode of Cuddy's World, the flagship show of the blog The World According to Cuddy, aka cuddysworld.blogspot.com. My name is Geno Cuddy, and a bit about myself before we get into tonight's topic. I am 21 years old. I live in Middletown, Connecticut. I am the host of the cable access talk show series, Geno in the Evening, which currently airs live every first Monday of each month at 7 p.m. on the Comcast Public Access Station 15, which serves Cromwell, Middletown, Middlefield, Portland, and East Hampton, Connecticut. I am also the host of the podcast, the new cult movie podcast, which reviews and talks about obscure cinema from the 1920s all the way up until the late 90s. I will be starting a new program soon entitled The Memory Machine, which will primarily cover the 80s and 90s in a sort of nostalgic experience, sort of a nostalgic roller coaster, if you will. I have been a production assistant on several film productions. I have also acted in some film productions. What are we going to be discussing tonight? Well, I've been, thinking about for a while now, this old film group that I used to run. See, I'm a big classic movie fan. I love classic cinema. I really think there's nothing better than just sitting down and watching an old black and white film from the 30s or 40s. And I wanted to introduce that to people. First, a little bit of how I got into this type of material. When I was 6 years old, my father passed away, and I was really left with nothing of his to remember him by. All I had was a toolbox, which is now gone, and a set of tools, which I still have. And I was looking for an outlet. I was looking for an escape. I wanted something to grab onto, something to generate towards, to take me away from that pain, from that misery, from that suffering. So my mother gave me a book entitled Why a Duck, and that book consisted of frame blow-ups and dialogue from the films of the popular 30s comedy team, the Marx Brothers. And I heavily enjoyed that book. I carried it with me everywhere I went, and I would often read from it and would crack people up with the jokes that were found within. And I said, you know what? I want to find these films. I want to be able to actually sit down and watch them. And of course, this is back in the good old days of VHS and God, I think it was even Laserdisc back then. I think by the time I got around, it was at the real tail end of Laserdisc though, and at the really big start of DVD. So a lot of their films hadn't hit DVD yet. So how it worked was I had a library system that I would use. I would loan different different items from different libraries, so I can get a greater picture of the Marx Brothers, because I had been so interested in their works and their material. And so I picked it up. I got the books. I read the books cover to cover numerous times. I would actually loan them out numerous times, not just once, but many, many times, just so I could soak it all in and just be like, okay, this is what these fellows are all about. And then I would go around and I would tell people, talk to them about the history, and they would be astounded by what I knew. And I was like, it's not really that hard if you want to have knowledge. You just got to read a book. That's all you need to do. I mean, of course, nowadays that's kind of passé because we have this beautiful thing called the internet. But back then, books was the shit. You know what I mean? And in full disclosure, I think they still are. I really think books are a good basis of knowledge, and I don't think nowadays I don't think people should turn their noses up at books and just go straight to the internet, because there's a lot on the internet that's infactual. There's a lot of incorrect information to be found on the internet. Not to say that there aren't any in books, but I think books are more reliable in that regard. But anyway, side tangent there. So I got these books and loved them immensely, and then I said, I think it's finally time I saw one of their films. So I believe the first film of theirs that I had rented was Monkey Business. Either that or it was The Coconuts, but I'm pretty sure it was Monkey Business. So I rented that from the library, and I sat down and I watched it. I didn't mind that this was a film well over 80 years old at this point. I didn't mind that this was black and white. I didn't mind the scratches. I didn't mind, the grittiness of the film. I didn't mind, how it looked, because I genuinely loved these guys and I just wanted to see anything and everything I could of theirs. So I just sat down, watched it, and was like, yeah, this is great. And seeing it finally in motion and hearing the delivery, because it's one thing to read this dialogue on a page, and then it's another thing to actually sit down and watch one of these films and hear the delivery, because in many ways, especially with comedy, and I could do a whole show on comedy, if you read something, you're just reading it. You're not really getting the full scope of the joke. If you hear the way it's delivered, that's how the joke works. Like, suppose Groucho stood up on stage or something and said, well, I shot some photos of the native girls, but they weren't developed, so I'm going back in a few weeks. I don't think it would go over as well. But the way he says it in Animal Crackers, he shot some photos of the native girls, but they weren't developed. But we're going back again in a couple of weeks. See, that goes over well. That sells better. So I was thrilled to finally be able to sit that down and watch this material. It was beautiful. It was marvelous. Seeing, essentially these four Jewish brothers trying to get a laugh and succeeding every single time. And so that was basically the start of my journey on classic film. And I was like, these guys are hysterical, but I want to go to the next level. I want to see other films of this time period so I can get a full scope of this time period. And I gravitated towards my library again for material, and there was a book, rather huge book, published by, I believe, DK, called Cinema, from the early 1900s all the way up to the late 90s. I think there were some films from the early 2000s in there. This was kind of an older book. I think it only went up to about 2002. And so I looked through it, and then I saw this picture of this giant ape. And I was like, what the hell is that? That looks freaking awesome. And so I read about it. It says King Kong. And I'm like, oh my god, I have to see this. I have to watch this. I have to find a copy of this. And lo and behold, my library had that. My library had a copy of that film. And so I took it home and I watched it. And I was astounded. It was like, I had never seen a monster movie before. I had seen King Kong. This was my first true blue monster movie. and I was astounded by the special effects. I loved every minute of it. Yeah, it was black and white. Well, actually, I think the first no. The first way I saw it was black and white. Then I saw the colorized version later with the oh so lovely lavender dinosaur. Um, and I just loved every minute of King Kong. Even the exposition was done well. I just freaking loved it. And then I read up on that story. And then I saw other films listed in that book, like Luis Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou, the surreal classic. And so I rented that film, much to the detriment of my mother, who didn't care for me watching those types of films. But regardless, and then I discovered the films of F.W. Murnau, Fritz Lang, and I was like, wow, the first really true blue full-length silent film I ever saw was Murnau's Nosferatu, because I'd always heard about it, I'd always read about it in these books, and I was like, you know what, I'm finally going to sit down and watch this film, and I did, and I taped it, of course, because it was on way past my bedtime. And it was the Channel 4 James Bernard version. And TCM, I believe, still airs that one, even though better restorations have been done. So, and I heavily enjoyed that. I was like, wow, even though this is older than anything I'd ever seen up to that point, it was still some of the best filmmaking I'd ever seen. And that's really what cemented my love of classic film, was seeing Nosferatu, King Kong, and the Marx Brothers films at such a young age. I believe I was only about 6 or 7 years old at that time. And discovering all that material was marvelous for me. And also what was big help was the fact that my sister attended a school that happened to have a freaking awesome library. My sister's library, my sister's school's library was the Thomas Jefferson Branch Library. And it was beautiful. They had all these great video cassettes and DVDs. Actually, no, it was more or less video cassettes at that time. And they had things like Max Fleischer's Gulliver's Travels. They had cult classics, nostalgia trips for me, like DuckTales the movie, The Iron Giant, a couple episodes of the Mr. Magoo show. And I was like, oh yeah. And they also had theatrical Popeye cartoons too. And everything else. Like, I remember I rented a 3G home videotape of Popeye, and it had 2 cartoons on it, that being Nearlyweds and the Crystal Brawl. That's it. Only 2 cartoons on that tape. And that's what got me into Popeye the Sailor, and what really got me into classic animation was that tape. I still remember the label to this day. It was so freaking plain. The cover, because it originally came in a box set that they took out and individualized it. So they just copied the tape label. That's it. That's all you did for on this old piece of printer paper, and that's it. Put it into the clamshell. Boom. There's your tape. And I remember I ran that tape and played that tape so much that it eventually broke, and I was disheartened when it broke, because that means I could never see those cartoons again. But thankfully, I found some more tapes much later on of Popeye cartoons, and of course now the DVDs. So that's pretty much how I discovered a lot of this classic material, and of course books in my own school libraries too helped tremendously, and so that's pretty much how I got into these classic films. It was a fun trip, and I love looking back on it every time and reminiscing about it, and the books that I bought. I still have a lot of the books that I bought from way back in the day. I still have somewhere around my house the RKO story, which I had bought, a coffee table book, at a library book sale years and years ago. It's all fallen apart now because I've just used it so many times, and I've had it since I was such a little kid. And that's where I was introduced to Wheeler and Woolsey and Cary Grant and all these other classic stars, and that's when I started tracking down their films, and then it just became like, basically my journey into film was like a snowball effect. I discover one thing, and then I wind up discovering other things, from that one thing, and everything just sort of branches out from there. It's like the 6th degree effect. It's like the Marx Brothers, Cary Grant, Nosferatu, Murnau, all this stuff I just stemmed from this one interest originally. And so fast forward to high school, and it's like, I want my fellow peers to have an appreciation for this material, and I think that they would heavily enjoy it. I think that, you know, if they're open-minded, they would like it, you know, because, you know, everybody was always talking about the newest movie, like Transformers. Oh, did you see the new Transformers movie? It was awesome. It's the best movie I've ever saw, and everything. And I would scoff my mouth at that, because me being a film snob, even at that time in high school when I was like freaking 16 years old, I was like, really? That's the best film you've ever seen? Hold my beer. Hold my fucking beer. Okay? I got something to show you. And so, what I wound up doing was, I taught to a teacher, a wonderful man by the name of David Frankel. He was a master talent. He was actually a scriptwriter on several episodes of the old sitcom Sister Sister from back in the 90s. And he had done a few scripts for other shows, but mostly from what I remember it was Sister Sister primarily. And he had copies of those scripts lying around, and he would use those in his creative writing class, and I loved every minute of his creative writing class. I mean, I've never truly told him, you know, like looking back on it now, I've never truly been able to tell him just the impact that he's made on my life, and how much I would love to just like meet up with him again, bro, and just say, you know what, you made such a tremendous impact on my life. You and I have you to thank for a lot of my successes. My teacher, Pamela, another teacher I had, Pamela Hinkle as well. She had a great impact on my life, and I remember her telling me a rather horrendous story about how she was related to somebody who worked for Republic Pictures, and how they had all this classic material that just wound up getting thrown away as if it were nothing. That story broke my freaking heart, bro. It broke my heart so bad, you know. And then as a parting gift from high school, she wound up giving me all these original photographs that she had of Marlena Dietrich from her private collection, and I was like, wow, this is amazing stuff. I think I still have those photos somewhere in my room. I think I still have those in a drawer somewhere. And so I had asked Mr. Frankel, said, hey, you know, I mean, me and you, we're both creative types, and we both have seen far superior films than what a lot of these other kids have seen. And he was like, you know what, Geno, you're right. And, you know, I started saying, hey, what about doing a film screening? We have basically an auditorium. We couldn't use the actual auditorium, of course. We had a lecture hall that had a huge projection screen that the cinema studies teacher, Ron Flash, used to display his films. And I was like, we have this. We have a sound system in there. Why don't we try and do like film showings after school? I'll do all the research. I'll print the posters. I'll handle all that. You just handle the administration end of it. And, you know, we agreed on that. And when I edit this podcast, I might put in some video slash audio clips of some of the trailers that I put together. I've only ever found one trailer that I put together, and that was actually for the first film showing I ever did. And that was for F.W. Murnau's 1922 classic Nosferatu. That was since I figured, since it was the first silent film I'd ever seen, I figured it would be nice to have it be the first film I would show. And I wanted to coincide it as well with the 90th anniversary of the film, which was, I believe, in and around March of 2012. So I believe it was March 19th, 2012. I'd have to go back and look at the trailer again. March 19th, 2012 was the first film showing I ever did. And I remember how difficult it was to just get those ads up there on the morning news, because we had a TV station in our school, and I taught to the video production teacher who I'd already have had experiences with. Me and her, she had already been my teacher, and she wanted to be my teacher again the following year. And I was like, hey, do you mind helping me out here? I'm starting a bit of a movie club, and I want to play these spots on the morning news in order to get people interested. And I remember blissfully, she would charge me $2 a pop each day for the airing of a 1-minute spot. which looking back on it now is kind of ridiculous, but whatever. Um, so I did. I forked over $2 of money I really didn't have, but I did it because I wanted people to see this material so badly. I wanted them to appreciate it and everything else, because up to that point in high school, I had mainly put on an act. I was mainly like acting like, ooh, I'm Big Papa, I'm, Razor Ramon, I'm this mega badass jerk who, and everything else. And it's like, I wanted to distance myself from that character because that was a character I played. That was the real me. Because I realized that once the mask came off, people wouldn't like me anymore. And sadly, that came to be truth. But I'll get into that I'll get to that later. And so I I showed Nosferatu. I put up posters all around the school too. I made posters. I think I still have some posters that I did. I don't think I have the one for Nosferatu though. And I would draw them because I was a rather good artist at that time. I've sort of lost touch with it for various reasons now. But I would draw these posters and I would put them up everywhere. I would do like 50 or 20 or so copies of the poster design, and I would put it all over the school. Be like, come see this at this date. Come see this at this date. And of course, the airtime got in the news. Sadly, all that work that I did went nowhere. It absolutely bombed. Every single showing I ever did bombed. And so Nosferatu wasn't a success. And I showed the pristine, restored copy of the film, and it was marvelous. It was like you could hear the Hans Erdmann music just playing on the speakers as loud as possible in stereo sound, and it was a marvelous, amazing extravaganza almost. Seeing this film finally on the big screen after so many years of just watching my old rinky-dink VHS copy of it that I taped off of TCM. It was nice to finally see the restored version up on a screen, and in like surround sound with the music and everything. I wish I had recordings from around that time. I wish I videotaped those showings. Because, you really haven't lived until you've seen a film like Nosferatu or Metropolis on a big screen with a live orchestra and a good audience. I mean, the film showings that I did never had orchestras. I would just play the DVD, but still, it's like, you can't replicate that experience watching it on TV. You just can't. Those are films like Gone with the Wind that you really need to see on a big screen. And so Nosferatu was the first film that I showed. Didn't go over too well. And I was like, I really want to continue showing these films. So I figured I'd pull another film out of my catalog, and that would be Fritz Lang's Metropolis. So I said, I said to Mr. Frankel, let's make this, kind of a monthly thing. And he said, sure, we'll go along with that. And I remember it was every second Tuesday of every month. Every second Tuesday of every month would be a film showing from me, and I remember the format of the film showings too. Like, I would talk a little bit at the beginning of them, like give a bit of a history lesson, let the film play, then at the end I would do a Q&A, for any other questions, cleaning up any any other unsolved mysteries or anything else, talking about anything that I hadn't covered prior to the film showing. And so the next film that I showed was, in fact, Fritz Lang's Metropolis. I played a trailer for it. I remember the trailer that I showed had a heavy metal score, even though the version that I wound up showing was actually the Marauder version. And the only reason why I showed the Marauder version was not because I was particularly fond of it. I mean, I love the Marauder version now, not so much then. But the reason why I showed it is because it's the shortest version I could find, because we didn't exactly have time for a 2-hour, 3-hour film screening. So really the Marauder cut was the best that I could do at the time. And so I showed it on the big screen, and I gotta tell you, it's awesome seeing the Marauder version on the big screen. Again, that's another experience where you haven't lived until you've heard Freddie Mercury's voice at such high levels blaring through speakers, while freaking Bridget Helm is dancing the tango and a bunch of guys are killing themselves over her. You really haven't lived until you've experienced that. I'm sorry, you really have not experienced that. really experienced life until you've experienced that. Um, and so that showing unfortunately didn't go over too well. And that one I tried to get more of an audience because I would promote it as the film that influenced Star Wars, the film that influenced The Matrix and Blade Runner, the film that influenced Janelle Monáe, Beyonce, and all the top artists of today. And you think that would get people interested in being like, hey, this is a movie Beyonce likes, so I'll go see it. Didn't go over. Didn't go over. And I even tried to bring Nosferatu back. I was even toying with the idea of doing a Marauder cut of Nosferatu with like modern pop music. And I did. I actually did put together a modern day pop music version of Nosferatu. Unfortunately, that thing no longer exists because looking back on it now, that was a freaking train wreck. Yeah, putting Lady Gaga to Nosferatu is not the best thing in the world, people. I'm just gonna freaking tell you that right now. Chicky may look weird, but she doesn't do the weird songs. So there was that. And I figured the next film I wanted to show, I wanted it to be something a little bit more modern. I didn't want to be known purely as a silent film guy. So I figured, hey, I loved Steven Spielberg's Duel from when I first saw it on Showtime back when I was about I'd say about 10. I saw that for the first time when I was 10 years old in middle school on Showtime of all things, and I just loved it. So I said, you know what? I'm gonna show this film. I'm gonna show Steven Spielberg's Duel. I'm gonna roll the big guns and everything else. I don't think I showed a trailer for that particular showing. I think that was one of the more lower end films that I did. Sorry about that. Sorry about the difference in audio quality there. That was one of the lower end films that I showed. Not that it was a low budget film, not that it was a bad film. It just it was one of those films that I really couldn't find a trailer for at the time. So I just put up the movie posters. And this led to something that I got to talk about here for a minute. This is still a thorn in my side to this day. I mean, considering that we were in high school, right? And that there are certain things that I mean, there are certain things for. Hold on. And what was really a big bone of contention for me was the fact that the movie poster that I wound up using was one of the original theatrical movie posters. And it was one that said, the murderer's weapon, a big 40-ton semi-truck or something like that. Something to that effect. It was a yellow poster. And I remember I got into a lot of trouble over the word murder on the movie poster. And so they were like, you know, you can't have the word murder on the movie poster. And I was like, this is high school, not preschool. What, we can't handle having the word murder displayed on a poster for a film that's being shown to an audience of high schoolers and teachers? We can't handle the word murder? Really? I have to blot that word out? And so I was like, all right, since we're all ultra sensitive and we can't handle even the word murder anymore, I scratched it out and I put Steven Spielberg's debut film. And you know what? Not even that helped. Nobody came to see that film either. But who did come was the cinema studies teacher, Ron Flash, and I actually did get some attention for that from him. And from then on out, me and him had a pretty decent relationship. So I embraced that. And it was a wonderful experience being able to talk with him. I mean, from what I remember, he didn't really care for the film too much. He didn't really like the music. And I respect that. I mean, Duel is it's a rare breed of film. It's definitely not mainstream Spielberg. I mean, unless you saw his name on there, you wouldn't know it's a Spielberg film because it's not really directed in the way he would go on to like do Jaws or Close Encounters or E.T. It's not a typical Spielberg film, and it's not even often remembered by many people, which is amazing because, you know, it is a really good film if you were to give it a chance. I mean, yeah, it's a simple premise on paper. Truck driver chases a car through the desert. That may be simple on paper, but the way it was executed was really, really good, I feel. So there was that film, and again, no interest. I thought, hey, he's finally showing a film in color. I think that would be great to go see. But not even that really attracted people. So I figured I gotta start knowing who my audience is. And so there's a film that I was a fan of that I wanted to show, and that was the 1976 film Ape, the King Kong ripoff from 1976. And and I showed it in 3D in its original 3D. It was anaglyph form, but it was 3D nonetheless. And so I showed the trailer twice. Once they showed it at the beginning of the news when nobody was even watching, and then I had them show it at the end when everybody was watching. I think I had actually shown the film maybe twice. I'm not sure. Because I tried to show it twice, just so that people could be like, okay, now we know what this film is showing. And so it wasn't the best showing in the world. I mean, again, more people did come because of the added attraction of 3D, but unfortunately the 3D effect did not work at all, and it actually gave people headaches. So I had them just take off the glasses and just watch the film with the red and blue freaking shit on the screen. Again, not a very pleasant experience, but something that you'd learn from. So there was that. And then I wanted to go back to what originally brought me to classic film, and I wanted to show a Marx Brothers film. So I showed the 1932 film Horse Feathers, and the reason for that was because since we were in high school, a lot of us, this was like way later at this point. This was like junior year, senior year. We were all thinking about, and some of us were actually going into college within a couple years, and so I wound up showing Horse Feathers because it's basically a satire on college, and I wanted people to be like, yeah, this is kind of funny and everything else. Unfortunately, I remember this film specifically, and I saw the original poster for it too. It was a really, really cool poster I designed for it. I couldn't get the lecture hall for this one. I had to show it in Miss Hinkle's classroom because they were repairing the lecture hall because the screen always went down. It had a seriously bad habit of just like zoning out and not being very, very good. But what are you gonna do? I mean, you can't help that, and technology goes awry, and you can't do nothing about it. So I remember a couple kids came, a friend of mine, Candace, and everything, but they wound up leaving, by the second act. And I don't think they really fully appreciated the film. They didn't get the jokes or anything, and I think it's kind of tragic that they didn't really get the jokes and that an audience from the year 2016 or back then, I think it was 2014. No, it was 2013, 2014. They couldn't get the humor. And I think that's one of the major tragedies of the world is that they can't really understand this type of material. And then after that, I did my last film showing, which was the celebration of the Fleischer Studios, the very famous Fleischer Brothers animation studios, Max and Dave Fleischer. And I had the whole thing laid out as to what I was going to show. I had notes. I remember clear as day what I was going to show. First, I was going to show a Betty Boop cartoon. I think the one that I showed was Bimbo's Initiation. That was a really, really good example of just what the Fleischers did and what made them popular. So I showed Bimbo's Initiation, which was very, very good. It went over very well. Then after that, and I would discuss the separate films individually in between the actual showings too, which was good. I consider myself a bit of a Robert Osborne of Middletown High, because he'd always been one of my influences, and I'm sad that he's gone now. And so First cartoon, Bimbo's Initiation, went over well. Second cartoon was Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor. I pulled out the big guns for this one because I think that that's probably the best of all the Popeye cartoons that they ever made. The music is spot on. The animation is perfect. The backgrounds are beautifully rendered and painted, and in the case of the 3D ones, beautifully crafted. And also it helped that it was an Academy Award nominee. So that certainly helped. However, sadly enough, during that short, somebody had hijacked the intercom system. And it was not a very pleasant experience because while Popeye and Sinbad were beating the living hell out of each other, a guy was ordering Subway on his cell phone. So yeah, not a very pleasant experience, not at all. And it was really upsetting too because the other two films that I wanted to show after that was the first Superman short that they did, the very first Superman short, and then I wanted to end things by showing their 1939 feature film Gulliver's Travels. And it's really a shame too because I'd always wanted to see Gulliver on a big screen. I think that film would go over better on a big screen than it would on the small screen where it's played so many years. And so that was the last film showing that I did because at that point, that's when I said, you know, I'm putting all this money, all this time, all this effort into these film showings, and nobody's coming to them, nobody's appreciating them, and why am I bothering doing this for people who don't want to open themselves up to this type of material? And there was a lot of politics going on at the school at that time too. I developed a lot of problems with a lot of people. A lot of it, mind you, not of my own decisions, but a lot of it based on the fact that, you know, maybe I was a little bit too big for my britches, and they wanted to bring me down a peg, kind of deal. And I must say, looking back on my experiences in Middletown High now, I really do not enjoy recounting my stories there at all because it was just a train wreck of an experience. You know, those 4 years that I attended that school was just a train wreck. I have very little positive to say about my experiences there. There's only a few people now that I even still have contact with from over there. But there are still some teachers, some that I have respect for. And two of them actually left a couple years ago, so go figure. But anyway, I figured I would make this episode short and just recount my experiences with my very unsuccessful movie club. You know, thinking actually about my friend John Carpenter, not the famous Halloween director, but a man who's really good and really a great filmmaker in his own right, John K. Carpenter, aka the Movie Man. He has dozens of classic films in his collection, and he's worked with Alpha Video and Oldies.com to release them on DVD. And he himself hosts screenings of these classic films, so you know I bet he would understand the pain that I went through trying to get these films out there to the public. So there's that. All right, guys. This has been Geno Cuddy. I'm going to record some more episodes soon. It's just I figured I would, you know, sort of like test the waters and figure how this one sounded. You know, I know that I stumbled a lot in this one. It's because I'm still just so new to podcasting, but I really hope you guys enjoyed some of this and got something out of it. And you know, if you have a dream, if you want to show people what you're interested in, don't be afraid to do so. And defy those odds. Like if people oppose you, try to rise above it and make them look bad, because that's the only way you're gonna win at the end. Well, guys, I'm just gonna like sign off right now, and be talking to you later. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave a comment below. Or when we finally do get the iTunes going, leave a comment and review there. You could find me on my Facebook page, facebook.com/official Geno Cuddy. That is GenoCuddy. There you can follow everything I do, from like my public access thing to my other podcasts to guest appearances I'm making other shows, funny quotes and everything else. And that about does it. Alright guys, I'll be seeing you later, and remember, have a beer, never fear, because Geno Cuddy will always be here. Peace out, ladies and gentlemen.
Obey justice. Take off everything. Move it, move it, move it, move it. You know what you're doing.